Okay.
Not a big deal.
Okay,
All right, sorry. I'll get it right this time. Okay.
and here we go. And 1 and 2 and 3. Hello and welcome to Deb's True Crime Notebook. This evening, we're going to be bringing you the testimony of Dr. Perlmutter from the hearing of Richard Allen. And I brought a couple friends along to help me out. You may be very familiar with this first guy. Hey, my buddy, my pal, Aspen Conner, how are you?
Hey there. I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. I'm so happy to have you helping me out today. I appreciate it.
Thank thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. And I also brought along my dear friend Laura. Hey, Laura,
Hello.
how are you, girl?
I'm good. And I'm gonna try my best acting skills from what I saw in the courtroom. So ready to go.
Awesome. So today, Aspen's going to be playing the part of Attorney Baldwin and Prosecutor McClellan. Laura will be Dr. Dawn Perlmutter, and I will be doing the intros, and I'll be portraying the part of Judge Gull. So without any further without any further ado, let's get rolling with the direct examination of Dr. Dawn Perlmutter. Proceedings.
Put on Dr. Perlmutter.
You may go ahead.
Thank you, Judge.
Direct examination of Dr. Dawn Perlmutter. Questions by Mr. Baldwin.
State your name and spell it for the record.
Dawn Perlmutter. DAWNPERLMUTTER.
Judge, I think what I'm going to do, just to help out, is and I don't know if this will help you. I don't know if you look at your computer or not, but I also have paper copies and whatever you prefer.
Paper.
Paper's better?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm going to hand you what I'm marking as, it's been marked as Defendant's Exhibit EE. Can you identify that for me, please?
That's my curriculum vitae.
Okay. And did you put that together?
Yes.
And is it updated?
It's about 2 years old. It's not updated.
Okay. Is there any big missing pieces? Anything you want to add?
Just a couple of cases that I worked on in a training contract.
We may get to that. Let's start with some basic stuff. What do you do for a living?
I'm the director of the Symbol Intelligence Group and an adjunct in the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine in their forensic medicine program.
Before we move forward, I wanted to kind of go through your CV with your help. On page 2, I think maybe, is it okay maybe if the judge were handed that?
Oh, okay.
Do you want to follow along?
Are we admitting that?
Or I'll move to admit.
Defendant's Exhibit EE offered. Thank you.
No objection. That was Mr. McClellan.
All right. So without objection, EE is admitted. Defendant's Exhibit EE.
On page 2, Dr. Perlmutter, it says that you are a subject matter expert in the area of expertise, and it lists symbols, symbolic anthropology, anthropological methodologies, atypical homicides, ritualistic crime investigation, and other things. What does that mean to be a subject matter expert?
It's a designation. It's a category, like, an engineer or program manager. But subject matter expert is also a government designation that equates to a specific pay grade.
Okay, so we'll get is a state government or U.S. government that has given you that designation?
U.S. government.
And who would pay you money?
As I've consulted with the FBI on different projects, and that is what I'm brought in as.
moving forward, on page 3, there's a listing of books that you've written. Is this a complete list of the books that you've written?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, I want to focus on ritualistic crime scene investigation. What is that book about?
That's a field guide for law enforcement if they're at a crime scene, if they're a crime scene analyst, if they're at a ritualistic crime, what to look for, what symbols, instructions on what to do.
Okay, and then at the bottom there, selected encyclopedia entries and book chapters. I'll focus on the first one there. Analyzing sacrificial violence. What is that about?
That was an introductory chapter I did for a book that was edited that had a lot of different authors writing on different types of violent murders.
I see that blood sacrifices is one of the subheads there.
Yes. Yep. Yes.
Ritual. The next one is Ritualistic Crime Survey, Encyclopedia of Forensic and Legal Medicine. What is that?
That was a survey entry for the Encyclopedia of Forensic and Legal Medicine that is used in schools and in medical schools.
Wait, and have those entries been peer reviewed?
Yes.
The next page is detailing law enforcement courses, development, instructions. Tell the judge a little bit about generally what do you do involving instruction?
Well, I train local, state, and federal law enforcement agents, analysts across every branch of government.
Going through some of those, ritual homicide investigation. Is that a course that you have taught?
Yes, that's a training that I've done for over 20 years, and that is, again, case studies of numerous different types of ritual homicides and what to look for and how they proceeded how they proceeded through different processes and that kind of thing.
And you still teach that today?
Yes, yes.
Okay. And did you say to whom you teach that to?
Yes, to local, state, and federal officers.
What federal officers? Agencies?
Again, Homeland Security, sometimes DEA, just FBI, different agencies.
Now, the next one is ritualistic crime scene investigation. What's the difference between ritualistic homicide and ritualistic crime scene? Those two courses.
Well, the ritualistic crime scene investigation is everything except the homicides. Like, that can be theft of human remains. It can be blood rituals that are done with certain subcultures, mutilations, just every different type manifestation of, can be narco cults, Palo Mayombe, just different types of things that officers would come across.
That don't involve home?
That short of homicide.
Symbolic analysis methodologies. What is that class about?
Well, that's an advanced class that is for intelligence analysts and investigators on the actual methodologies. So when they're analyzing different types of crimes, it's a lot of different, it's more than just behavioral analysis or investigative analysis. It gets into semiotics and hermeneutics, and it's a very theoretical class teaching how to apply different methods.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll talk about methodology later, I think. But the last one is racially motivated violent extremist and militia violence. What is that class about?
That's the trainings I've been doing for the past couple years. Racially motivated violent extremists involves like white supremacy groups, and when I do these trainings, I focus on the identifiers, all the different types of ideologies and religions that they hold, and like things like tattoos and rituals and initiation rites that would be associated with these groups.
What is your educational background?
Well, my background, so I have 3 advanced degrees. 2 are in art and art history, which applies in terms of, again, methodologies, a doctorate in arts and humanities from New York University. But that was interdisciplinary, so that involved, anthropology, philosophy, and methodologies. I focused on rituals and initiation rites that would be associated with these groups. Oh, did I read the wrong one?
You started on number 18, on line 18.
Okay, great. Art history is very relevant in that there's a methodology called iconography, where a lot of these, am I on the right one? Okay, where a lot of these different religions and ideologies have pantheons of gods and goddesses. So in art history, paintings, historical paintings, literally they call them attributes that would go to each tradition and it shows up as identifiers as at different scenes. So that's how that's applied.
Okay, what do you do? What are your kind of jobs at the Symbol Intelligence Group? What are your
Well, I do consulting, case consulting and training, and we produce intelligence bulletins that are put out, the different fusion centers across the country.
what would you say are your qualifications as an expert on ritual homicide and ritualistic crimes?
I've worked on dozens of different ritual homicide cases. I have experience with that. I've worked on probably hundreds of ritualistic crimes, all at different phases, and have written literally written books on this and the textbook on it. Just also have crime scene training and just a lot of years of experience.
Have you, when you said that you've been involved at various stages, what do you mean by that?
Well, I may get called in while they're at a crime scene or they're still at a crime scene, which, if it's an unusual or atypical scene, or I could be called in at a point where it's already being adjudicated in court, or it could be cold case homicide, and so all different points in time.
So you get called in maybe at the beginning, maybe at the middle, maybe at the end.
Exactly.
All right. And have you ever testified in court?
Yes. So I've testified on 3 different homicide cases, a U.S. case in a case that involved ritualistic crimes in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and other cases that involved ritualistic crimes.
And how would you divvy up helping out, if you want to call it that, testifying on behalf of the defense, testifying on behalf of the prosecution?
I've only testified for the defense once before. I primarily work with the prosecution.
Where did you work prior to the Symbol Intelligence Group?
I worked at NES Associates, and they were based in Alexandria, Virginia, and they had contracts with the Department of Defense and had an intelligence agency. So I worked there as a subject matter expert there.
How would you say that your education and experience is relevant to law enforcement?
Well, I'm applying a lot of the theoretical academic theories to law enforcement, and I literally train on what to look for. The different, because symbolism is a number of things. It can be graffiti, tattoos, codes, dates, insignia. So it just crosses over a lot of different areas. It can cross over counterterrorism, and just you get requests for information on identifying these different things to determine if a group is violent or things like that.
What training, if any? I think I saw that you teach a class on it. So I'm presuming you have training specific to white supremacy, or as in this case, we'll talk called Norse paganism or Odinism. Are you familiar with those?
Yes, that comes under the racially motivated violent extremists. Excuse me. And I'm going back probably 25 years. I've been identifying the identifiers with that. I mean, because a lot of those groups, there's a lot of tattoos, there's a lot of initiation rites, there's all kinds of codes that confiscated documents that have coded messages.
Are you an Odin expert, would you say?
I'm not. I wouldn't say I'm an Odin expert. I would say I'm a generalist in the symbols of all these different groups. So, I'm able to distinguish from somebody practicing Odinism versus Christian identity, which is another white supremacist religion. So, as a generalist, you're able to distinguish the different types of ideologies from what you're seeing at the scene.
Would it help if you had some water? Some water?
I knew that would happen thanks.
I want you to talk a little bit about, while we're on the topic of Norse paganism and Odinism and white supremacy groups, how would you describe, like, is there a one working way that the Norse paganists operate, or is it multiple different ways? How would you describe that?
Well, Norse paganism is a huge category. There's neo-pagans that are nonviolent. There's dozens of different groups. They practice differently. They're decentralized, so they can be geographically located. But then you have variations. They worship different pantheons of gods. So then you'll have racist neo-pagans that are very popular in the prison system and much more violent and do blood rituals. So there's a lot of different types of neo-pagans. I mean, some refer to themselves as Satru or heathenism or Wick. There's a lot of different groups.
Would there, if there was a group that might say they're Odinists in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, or a Norse pagan group in Columbus, Ohio, I mean, is there would there be any similarities between these groups, or
Well, if the Odinists, like other groups, they have, general symbols that they share. So the Odinists are, they follow Odin and Thor and certain gods, and they have the same types of, symbols. So the hammer, uh, but as they splinter off and have their own kindreds, then they organize into kindreds. Their rituals will be particular to that specific group.
okay?
So they will generally have certain things in common, but then as they go into different areas, a lot of them do advocate for personal types of rituals.
Where would they? How would a group in Oshkosh, Wisconsin group come up with their ritualistic practices versus the Columbus, Ohio group?
Well, everybody seems to originally organize on the internet. So social media is a huge part of this now, and they will have Facebook pages, meetups. They'll organize that way, or they will splinter from, well, the violent ones will splinter from like outlaw gangs and, the Vinlander Social Club, and they just have different leaders and change as the different leaders take over.
And so there's a set. Is there a set way that anybody conducts a ritual or ceremony uniformly across the United States or on any of this Norse stuff?
Well, there are just like there's general symbols, there's general things with rituals, like they're all nature-based ideologies. So they tend to be conducted outdoors in wooded areas. They will, all these different groups will have altars, that kind of thing. But then it gets more specific after that.
Okay, all right. Let's talk about methodology. Well, what type of an research methodologies? What type of analysis do you use when reviewing a case?
Well, it depends on things found at the crime scene. I do what is called symbolic anthropological methodology, which is different than behavioral analysis, which is based on psychological methods. The symbolic anthropology method focuses on the culture, and you're interpreting the information from the person's point of view, so their worldview, as opposed to forms of psychopathology. So it looks at different cultures and ideologies.
So, what does that? Can you delve into that a little bit more? Like the difference between the how did you say it? Behavioral psychology?
Oh, well, behavioral analysis that's a preferred method with, well, I guess that's how most agents are trained, because it's a Western logical, rational thinking, and that has it's also a form of what they used to call profiling. So they'll interpret different types of behavior as either a personality, by somebody with a personality disorder or some type of psychopathology, whereas with an anthropological interpretation, the person may have done a violent ritual, but it's it's in terms. I mean, it can be an initiation rite, opposed to somebody who's psychologically, has a personality disorder. So they're completely different ways of looking at the same type of information.
Have you ever seen that be a problem in terms of law enforcement understanding what's going on at a crime scene?
Yes, it happens quite often in these very atypical types of crime scenes. There's very little, if any, training on crime scenes. I mean, you can walk in, you can have terrible mutilations with animals and things written, just the worst types of symbols cut into people, and then and there are different traditions. Like for example, satanic ideologies, they do a lot of ritual murders, and they have certain symbolism specific to them. They will usually dismember or mutilate. They'll have pentagram type things there. If you have like, Palo Mayombe, which drug traffickers do, they'll have like a called in ganja, which is like a cauldron with a human skull in it that was stolen from a grave. And so every different scene is specific, has very specific attributes and specific identifiers to the different groups. And they're quite different, and it goes to their particular traditions and what they're doing.
Well, how would it be, though, that law enforcement get it wrong? I mean, I know a pentagram is a Satanist. I would think that I know that at least, but how do law enforcement get it wrong sometimes?
Well, it's just, again, it's methodological. It's perspective. So if you're only interpreting things from a form of psychopathology, and somebody's doing these heinous murders, it could be viewed as a sexual sadist, or it could be viewed as a serial killer, and without attributing the ideology that goes with it. So it's just a different interpretation. It's a different perspective on
What is hermeneutics?
it. Hermeneutics, I don't is another methodology that I apply when there's text or certain types of symbols. It's the interpretation of originally the interpretation of biblical text, but the methodology is taking ancient text or ancient types of writings and interpreting it and how it's being used today. So how the intentionality, how that person is applying it today. So it's different than linguistics or philosophy, philology, which translate what a code is. This is looking at trying to interpret it and how it's being used at, for example, a crime scene.
Okay, I want to talk about that just a second. And I don't know if this is when we're talking about the behavioral, the Western thinking versus what you're talking about, but is it is wrong for police to want to interpret, oh, I want to know exactly what this means, or what did you refer to when you made an interpretation?
Well, there's like in linguistics, or
if you show up at a crime scene, I think it would be natural, what is this guy trying to say? What would he say? What do these symbols mean? Is that important, or is it more about, I'm just trying to figure this out. I mean,
well, it's very important in figuring out who did it. And the biggest distinction between, sort of behavior analysis and the anthropological approach is with behavioral analysis, they're thinking rationally. Okay, so it's a rational Western perspective where most of the people doing these in these different ideologies and religions, they think magically. So magical thinking is a huge part of interpreting what is going on, because they're not thinking about it logically. So if they leave items there, it's not because they're leaving it, they accidentally left it. Everything has a meaning. So everything at that scene would has a meaning. They're either doing it as an offering or to gain power, achieve certain things. That's the significant difference. The well, from a rational, again, it's very hard to apply rational Western thinking to why somebody would do certain things.
That phrase, magical thinking, is that your phrase or is that kind of an industry phrase?
It's a common term. It's used for example, people who are like superstition would be a form of magical thinking. Prayer actually is a form of magical thinking. It's things that don't have a rational, logical cause and effect. So the cause and effect is that if you sacrifice a chicken, that it's going to make you have good luck. That is not a rational way of thinking. That's a magical way of thinking.
Is Norse paganism or Odinism, does that involve magical thinking?
Absolutely, all of yes.
Keep going. All of what?
Well, most of these neo-pagan groups involve magical thinking.
Well, what part of Odinism or Norse paganism is magical? Like what aspects of it?
Well, the whole belief system, the idea that, well, it's pre-Christian, so they're polygamists. They have a lot of different gods, and the rituals that are done, it's the belief that if you have an altar and say certain things or arrange things in a certain way, that you are kind of intervening in your life. You're making things happen, whether it's to, it's their way of prayer.
We've heard about runes. What are runes as it relates to Odinism?
Well, runes are in Odinism. So Odin was considered the father of the runes. He discovered them after being hung on a tree, the world tree, for 9 days. But runes are an ancient, well, they're a Nordic language and they're imbued with magical qualities. So there's elder Futark and younger Futark, and they're used across the spectrum. So a lot of different groups use runes, but they're very specific to Odinism as the identifier.
What about blood as it relates to magical thinking in Norse paganism religions?
All right. Well, blood rituals are part of Odinism. The racist Odinist version, where it would involve, there's a concept of blooding the runes, where you're kind of consecrating your runes. You could have an altar and doing things with blood. So it's, also some do animal sacrifice.
But is blood magical? It might not. Maybe I'm just not saying that right.
Well, blood is sort of the highest offering across, historically and across cultures. A blood offering was always one of the highest offerings. It represents life and death, the sacred and profane. So when it appears at a crime scene or is being used, the person the offender usually understands the meaning.
Is it personal to them, or is it something that everybody that would walk onto the scene would say, "Oh, I know exactly what this means"?
No, it's usually personal. A lot of these things are rituals that they're doing. So personal rituals for their own, it's encouraged actually in a lot of these groups.
I'm going to put on, just so, I don't know if the court can read that, but it may not work here, but I want to talk about what are the indicators. And you teach a class on this, so
Yeah.
you probably don't even need me to put this up here. But what are the crime scene indicators that you teach law enforcement to look for when they come on a scene? And I'm just going to go through these one at a time. Are these items you gave me?
Yes.
Is that correct? We just kind of put it on a poster board so you can kind of guide us through it. Ritual murder crime scene forensic indicators. Number 1, place of death. Why is that important?
Side note, this was like 7 poster boards, but moving on. Well, the place of death is very indicative of the type of ideology you're looking at. And like I said before, the neo-pagan, the Odinists, they're all nature-based ideologies. So they do their rituals in clearings, outdoors. In fact, they have, usually near bodies of water, because they're dealing with natural elements. So if you have, for example, an indoor homicide scene that's ritual murder, and I've had cases like that, well, that's more it's more indicative of somebody's doing a copycat of a film or something. It's not. The place is very significant.
And then reading for Attorney James Luttrell says, Your Honor, may I approach the board to make sure?
Sure.
It's.
Yeah.
I have a copy of. Thank you, Your Honor.
You're welcome.
And then back to Mr. Baldwin. And in a moment, you will be looking at crime scene photos as we're going through these various indicators. What about the date of death? That's another thing that you gave us as an indicator of a ritualistic crime scene.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, dates are significant. So sometimes homicides occur on, they can occur due to astrological moon phases, celestial events. They can occur on specific holidays, political or current events. So one of the things I always check are that particular date, if it equates to a certain ritual that different groups do on that date. So yeah,
We'll talk about that as it relates to this case in a minute. Now, cause of death is the third forensic indicator for a ritualistic murder crime scene. What does that mean?
cause of death is, of course, very, very significant because usually in ritual murders, there's a lot of torture, blood loss, and you don't get bullet wounds. They're very usually stab wounds, and again involving torture as a part of what they're doing.
Okay, so cause of death can tell you something when you're on the scene.
Yes, yes, and it can point to different types of groups. Okay, like I said before, certain like cartels will some they do a lot of beheading ritual type murders, and then put the heads on altars, and you have Satanists who will carve symbols. Different they tend to do different types of things. So what they do is very important. What they do different is important.
All right. Number 4 forensic indicator you have is the murder weapon. What? Why is that indicator? Why is that an indicator of a ritual murder crime scene?
Well, because the weapon of choice is usually a knife. I mean, a ceremonial knife. So it's very rarely found at the crime scene. So it's something that would be an object that would be very important to the offender, and that's what makes it part of the ritual. That it's a ceremonial object.
Next is the symbolism at the crime scene. What is that?
Well, that's everything from things carved into I don't know, things hung at trees, on trees, carved. Sometimes, again, like I said, carved on victims. Interestingly, what happens a lot, which I train officers on, is with these outdoor scenes, they will use natural objects as part of the scene. So they'll use branches either to create a circle, or they'll use rocks to create symbols with natural items of the scene.
Okay. Body disposition is also identified as the 6th ritual murder crime scene forensic indicator. What does that mean?
That's how the body is positioned, has a very specific meaning to the offender. So it's, one of the ways of indicating that it's a ritual murder is that it's not a counter forensic measure.
What is a counter forensic measure?
So if somebody is just committing a crime and wants to get away with it, they will hide the body, bury the body, or to avoid biometrics, they'll, cut the fingertips off or things like that to avoid identification, or to literally hide from so the police can't investigate either who the victim is or who the offender is. But that's not what happens in ritual murders. The body is positioned in a very specific way that has meaning to the offender.
Is it would it have meaning to anybody else that might walk onto the crime scene?
It may not. It's that's the that's what you're trying to interpret. What
And lastly is atypical blood pattern. What does that mean?
Well, a lot of times, like the blood of the victim is used as part of the rituals. It is used in symbolism. It's used a lot of times on the body. It can be almost like to anoint the victim on their face, or a lot of things. A lot of atypical, unusual things are done with the blood of the victims.
How would you define a ritual murder?
Well, a ritual murder, it's a murder that goes beyond conduct required for the killing. That's not a counter forensic measure and has unusual behavior or symbolism.
What do you remember reviewing for this case to make some opinion about whether this was what happened in Delphi, Indiana on February 13th and or 14th was a ritualistic murder?
The actual items that I reviewed?
Yeah, just so the judge has an idea of what you're basing your opinion on.
Okay. I reviewed crime scene photos, the autopsy reports, the bloodstain pattern report, report from BAU, I think Indiana State Police, and I'm trying to and some a lot of social media postings and a ceremony video and I think a police interview video.
What did you ultimately conclude about the scene there?
In my opinion, this was a textbook ritual murder. It has all of the elements that are listed there. And when I talk about indicators, like, for example, when you're doing fingerprint analysis, you need like 12 to 15 matches to have a good indicator. This has numerous indicators of the types of things you have at a ritual murder.
Okay. We're going to go actually through the 1 through 6. I don't know that we're going to hit 7, but place of death, ritual murder crime scene forensic indicator number 1. I'm putting this on the easel, and then I'm going to hand the court and to mark it so that we know what the judge was looking at. I'm handing the court exhibit FF and would ask that it be admitted into evidence.
Defendant's exhibit FF offered. Any objections, Mr. McClellan?
Nick McClellan says, "No, Your Honor, thank you."
I'll show FF as admitted without objection.
Back to Attorney Baldwin. Says, "So this is a crime scene photo. What about this crime scene photo causes you to believe that it applies to number 1, place of death, that determines it's a ritualistic murder?"
The aerial view really shows, in a lot of these cases that it's almost like a clearing, and in that case, it's surrounded by trees, and during these rituals, they have to separate designated sacred spaces from like profane secular space. That's so they need a clearing to where they do it, and this and being near a body of water is very, very common too.
Okay, I mean, it's significant to you that where the circle is, that there's a space there?
Well, I put the circle in because it's typically referred to as casting the circle. When and even the neo-pagans, when they do it, they separate they're sanctifying the space for the ritual. So it might not be perfect circle, but the fact that it was a clearing and they're like, not like, at near, relatively close to the water.
So is that considered a strong indicator or just an indicator?
It's a strong indicator.
But number 2 is the date of death. Does that date of death correspond to a holiday? What does your research reveal on that?
Well, the only holidays that fall between February 13th and 14th is one, and there weren't any celestial events or anything at that time. So, I mean, this one's called a Valus Blocked. It's an Odin holiday, or for the son of Odin, Valley, and it's actually a sacrificial holiday. So the thing with Nordic holidays is they're from sundown to sundown. So even if it's on the 14th, it starts on the 13th with sundown.
Okay, so the fact that these crimes occurred on the 13th and the 14th is because of the Valsablot, what does that tell you? I mean, I think it's kind of obvious, but what does it tell you?
Well, the dates can be, they're not as strong as an indicator. It's just, another thing to look at that it is a specific Odinist holiday. There's other dates like Samhain and Beltane. There's ones that are very specific to other groups, but none of the other ones fall in this area.
So is it a strong indicator, at least in this case?
It's one indicator, yes.
All right. The next is cause of death. Sharp force injuries to the neck. Do you have, let's talk, tell why the cause of death in this case is an indicator, a forensic indicator, that this was a ritualistic murder scene.
Well, because it was sacrificial, and there's different types of, like I said before, there are different types of ritual murders. So they're done for different reasons. So, for example, there's exorcisms that are, that could be done with fire. People, I had a case where a little girl was burned to death in an exorcism. You have other cases where the bodies are dismembered for different reasons. But the specific slitting of the throat is indicative of a sacrificial offering or initiation type. It's to, that is, again, like throughout history and across cultures, that's how sacrifice is done. It's by cutting the throat and letting the blood come out.
Okay, I'm going to just admit just the autopsy reports as evidence of what happened to these girls.
You, Baldwin. Your cue.
Oh, I said, okay, I'm going to move to admit just the autopsy reports as evidence of what happened to these girls.
And then it continues.
Oh, so, and did you review the autopsies? I don't remember. I reviewed the reports and the photos. Yes,
I reviewed the reports and the photos. Yes, or am I getting this wrong?
No, I got it wrong. I apologize.
I reviewed the reports and photos. Yes.
Move to admit exhibits GG, which is the autopsy for LG and HH and AW autopsy report.
Defendants exhibit GG and HH offered. Any objections?
Mr. McClellan says, no objection, Your Honor.
All right. Without objection, HH and GG are admitted.
Back to Baldwin. Is there anything more to be said about that you haven't already said about cause of death related to this case as an indicator?
No, that's...
Next, we'll talk about the murder weapon itself. I'll show you here this board and move to admit exhibit A-II. Did you review this item? I'm going to move to admit II.
Defendant exhibit II offered. Any objections?
Mr. McClellan says, no, Your Honor.
All right. I'll show without objection. II is admitted. Defendant's exhibit II admitted.
Mr. Baldwin says, and I don't want to talk about a third party yet. I just want to talk generally speaking.
Well, yeah, that's an altar. It's an odinist altar, which is indicated by the objects there. Look at my picture. The Thor's hammer, the candle, the runes, the rune pouch, the knife, not knife, personal photos, and the glass of mead or whatever that liquid substance was.
And would it be common that a knife might have been used in a sacrificial ceremony, might be part of this altar?
Yes.
And we'll get into it, so we don't belabor the point. What do you think is important in this case, this photograph related to the third party suspect?
Yes.
Why is that?
Because it indicates that the person thinks magically, is practicing Odinism. There's a ritual knife involved, and it's part of the social media images.
And this is, for the record, this is social media that was found on Brad Holder's Facebook page. Is that correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
All right. So next is symbolism at the crime scene. This one I want to be very careful with, so bear with me. I don't want to talk about the third party component of this yet. I just want to talk about the symbolism. We're on to the symbolism at the crime scene, which is the fifth forensic indicator. So this is and I'm going to move to admit the paper version of this. Mark this exhibit as JJ, move to admit that.
Defendant's Exhibit JJ offered. Any objections?
Mr. McClellan then says, Judge, as long as we can explain a proper foundation, I guess I'm a little fearful of, I want to make sure this is clear. This is not a post from Brad Holder's Facebook page. This is something the defense has created from collecting various portions of discovery. I don't want it to be mischaracterized as this is a post from Brad Holder's Facebook page. Mr. Baldwin then says, fair enough. As an officer of the court and going on in this case, I'll try to do that. The middle portion, foundationally, is a crime scene photo that we were given by the state of Indiana, as well as the photograph here on the right. That was not given to us at the same time. We put those together. And then this one is his Facebook post, and we received that in discovery, and we would be offering them together for purposes of demonstrative evidence.
All right. So with that understanding, I'll...
Mr. McLean says, yes, Your Honor. No objection from the state.
admit JG. Defendant's Exhibit JJ admitted.
Mr. Baldwin, thank you. But I really want to focus at this time on the middle photo because we're talking about symbolism at the crime scene. What is that indicative of as it relates to ritualistic murders?
The branches were carefully placed in that arrangement. It appears to be identical to the marking, and it's the person is creating some type of symbol. So in this case, after reviewing everything in the context, it appears to be what's called a bind rune.
What is a bind rune?
A bind rune is when you combine two or more runes and to create personal symbols or to create to combine the power of the two different things. It's done quite often, and it's a very common type of practice, which magical practice. Sorry,
I had to kind of do my thing while you were talking, and I know that's probably distracting. I'm going to move to admit this is LL. I'm sorry, KK. Move to admit that.
Defendant Exhibit KK offered.
Mr. McClellan says no objection.
All right. Without objection, KK is admitted. Defendant's Exhibit KK admitted.
Mr. Baldwin says, I'm going to hand you what's been marked as KK, although it's 19 on the copy I'm handing to you.
All right. Okay.
I want you to review that and just tell me what significance that is.
Okay. The significance of this is the person is discussing on their post how they had put a mark on their body. It was the Gebo rune, and it felt like different things were happening in their life, that it wasn't the gifts the gods were giving him, both positive and negative. He felt that he had to add another rune to it, which he did, the Isa rune, over top, creating the bind rune. And then literally at the end of the post is, repeating Isa rune, Isa Gebo, and then he combines the words Isabo. This is
Isabo?
Well, this is indicative of somebody who's thinking magically. So they are indicating that they believe that the mark that they had put on was having certain things happen in their life, and that they added the second rune to control aspects of their life. So this clearly indicates somebody who believes in this type of rune magic.
And that is, for the record, that is a Facebook posting from Brad Holder. Is that correct?
Yes.
And this is a close-up version of that hand, the marking on his hand. Is that correct?
Yes.
Again, you talked a little bit a second ago about why is that significant to this compared to the stick arrangement found on that body?
It's identical to it. It's somebody it's the exact same configuration.
Is there any way that's a counter forensic activity? The 3 sticks found on this young woman?
No. It would be, they're not hiding the body at all. it would not work. It doesn't function that way at all. And there were other indicators in what I reviewed of a number of runes being done in the sticks. There were a number of social media photos of the scene, not just the marking, but sticks in the shape of runes. So there was, rune magic was being done in branches in the woods.
And we're talking about with this person named Brad Holder. You reviewed his social media pages.
Yes.
And you saw lots of sticks that were...
Well, they were specifically arranged as, into bind runes. They were done in wooded areas, and that was prior to the homicide.
Okay. See what the next, still on the symbolism at the crime scene. I wanted to look at the way that LG's body was displayed. Well, I'll use this one. I'm going back to Judge. I don't know what exhibit that was.
FF.
Looking at the stick arrangements on LG's body, does that tell you something about this forensic indicator symbolism at the crime scene?
Well, that had specific meaning to the offender. It's, in my opinion, it's intentional. The branches were placed in a very specific way. It's obviously not a counter forensic measure because she's completely exposed. It could also, I guess when we're interpreting this, it could also be a combination of the positioning of the body, could be considered like, one type of symbol. The branches on top could be another. It had important things that it had specific meaning to the offender, and it wasn't to try to hide the body.
Did you compare that when looking through the various, well, let me see if I can find this one here. I might just have to mark this one. No, here it is. All right. This one will be the smaller version of what's on the poster board. This is called LL. Move to admit that.
Defendant's Exhibit LL offered. Any objections?
Mr. McClellan says, no, Your Honor.
All right. Without objections, LL is admitted. Defendant's Exhibit LL admitted.
We're still using poster board? Sorry. Side note.
Mr. Baldwin?
Thank you. Oh, I also move to admit, whatever this would be, move to admit MM, and I didn't want to make a poster of that.
Defendant's Exhibit MM offered. Any objections?
Mr. McClellan says, no, Judge, as long as it's sealed. Mr. Baldwin then says, no objection.
Okay, I'll admit MM and we'll seal it. Defendant's Exhibit MM admitted.
Mr. McClellan, thank you, Judge. Mr. Baldwin. Okay, actually, if I might, just be careful with this if you would. I'm going to hand you what was just entered as MM at this, another copy of, did you have a chance to look at what, I guess that would have been LL and MM?
Yes, and these were, well, that is what I was referring to before with the arrangement of these branches in the woods. The arrangement of which they are, in my opinion, runes, and being on these social media posts, and the one arrangement is very similar, almost identical to the arrangement on, that's the victim.
On the victim, okay. And what does that tell you? As you're trying to find, you teach these classes, you're trying to find a suspect. What does all of this so far that we've been talking about tell you?
Well, it tells me that, it's a process of what it isn't. And it's not. Like I said, in the categories of Satanism or exorcisms or nor narco cults or gangs. These are natural objects that are being used and consistent with social media postings with literally rituals that are being done in the same configuration. So it shows that it's a connection to that person.
For the record, LL was Brad Holder's Facebook post that was of the two stick runes, as you call them, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's your opinion.
specifically bind runes. Bind runes.
Well, this actually, we're looking at, and I'm sorry, Judge, I can't remember which one this is. You told me about 3 times.
FF.
FF. We're looking at FF, the poster size version. And let's move on to that 5th or 6th indicator, body disposition. And from FF and the blown up version, at least, can you comment on the way the body disposition is indicative of a ritualistic crime?
Well, because of the, again, it's not, well, obviously a counter-forensic measure, but the careful placement, positioning the natural objects on top of bodies, also the symbols of the scene. So body disposition and the cause of death inside that sort of creation of a sacred grove or the clearing area is, and all classic indicators of a ritual murder.
Okay. And I want to show you now, this is the blown up version. I'm going to hand you, I'll move to admit NN, which is the smaller version for the court.
Defendant exhibit NN offered. Any objection?
Mr. McClellan says, Judge, no objection. Again, the same clarification as before. This is an exhibit that the defense have created. It's not from a Facebook post. It's, I would say, a triple side-by-side picture that the defense has created.
Okay.
Mr. Baldwin, I agree, it is.
I'll show NN is admitted over without objection with that qualification. Defendant's exhibit NN admitted.
Mr. Baldwin, thank you. Talking still about the 5th, I'm sorry, body disposition. What does this exhibit
The
show you?
middle image is a painting from a face or a social media page of Odin hanging.
Mr. McClellan, Judge, I'm going to object at this point. Can I ask some foundational questions?
Yes.
Mr. McClellan, okay, we clarified this as something that the defense has created. Now, you're testifying this is from a Facebook page. Have you observed the Facebook page?
I observed. No, I did not.
So you don't know where the image is from?
It was in the images that I was given to review.
I understand that.
Yeah.
But you don't know where the image came from.
I didn't see it on a Facebook page.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. I'm sorry.
I did not see the image on a Facebook page.
So, safe to say, you don't know where the image came from, but you saw the image, and it was given to you by defense.
Correct.
Okay. So, Judge, I guess I'd just ask the court to, strike in their own mind that this is from a Facebook page. There's no foundation she can testify to that. I don't have any objection to being a demonstrative exhibit from the defense. But beyond that, Judge, I object.
Okay.
Mr. Baldwin, as an officer of the court, I would say this is way off of the Brad Holder's Facebook page. It's a painting that I could give you the reference. In fact, I think we already did this on Tuesday. He laid the foundation that he made this painting in his deposition. I have that. Maybe on break, I can give that to you.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you. So what does this hanging man and the body disposition, which is the 6th indicator, why does that tell you, what does that tell you about this third party who posted this?
So the positioning of the legs particularly are identical. The image itself is a very common classic. Of the painting is a classic depiction of Odin. It's used in tarot cards, although tarot is not part of this. But it's an image that's very common of, in Odinism, where you have him depicted during some during sort of the primary event where he's hanging on the tree for 9 days, discovering the runes. And that is significant because the classic image usually has the other leg bent, but the painting is the same leg and the same positioning as the leg as the victim. Also, in the painting and with the victim, the eyes and the mouth are open.
If I were to represent as an officer of the court that this painting, and in low lighting, you can't really see here that Brad Holder, that the painting shows that it was signed and dated on February 17th, 2018, which is 1 year to the date that he was interviewed by police. Would that mean anything? Or am I just trying to be a defense lawyer and do defense lawyer things?
Well,
If that's the case, then that's fine.
well, no, dates do, anniversaries, commemorative dates have meaning to people. It may have meaning. The fact that it's almost the year anniversary of the homicide.
But again, it goes to that person, right? The individual. What it means is the meaning to that person. So it would really be unfair for us to ascribe some meaning to that. Would that be accurate?
Again, these offenders are so they create everything. Yeah, everything's personalized. These rituals are personalized. Even though it starts out in the context of an ideology, there's so many different manifestations of these different ideologies that everybody personalizes it. They're encouraged to.
I want to put up, take a look at that, or the corresponding. You're looking at the bigger version of 00 or 00. If that's, I'm sorry. May I move to admit 00?
Defendant's Exhibit 00 offered. Any objections?
Mr. McClellan, no, Your Honor, no objection.
All right. Without objection, 00 is admitted. Defendant's Exhibit 00 admitted.
Mr. Baldwin, okay, so this was a crime scene photo. What is the significance of this as it relates to a forensic indicator?
Well, the significance is that, the stronger significance is that it's in the victim's blood and it's a marking on the tree near, I guess, at the scene. And it, in my opinion, is an intentional mark. It's not like an obvious symbol under, again, Satanism or other types. It appears to be consistent with ancient alphabets that are used, quite a lot at these scenes. Sometimes you get Enochian or Eden or Arabic or Hebrew. You get a lot of different ancient alphabets that they believe imbues it magically. This is most consistent with runes. And again, with runes, they are depicted a number of different ways online and historically. So they're stylized. There's different fonts, but that's what this appears to be. It's an intentional mark. And the significant thing is that, which is very consistent with ritual murders, is that the victim's blood is being used to create a symbol, which gives it magical efficacy. It gives it more power to what the person's doing or thinking.
I think you read the blood splatter report, and they don't view this as an intentional. They view it as something else, but...
I'm not a blood splatter expert. I've taken some training in it, but this to me is an absolute intentional mark. It does not seem consistent.
Well, we'll move on to this. This is the big version. We'll look at that smaller version of that, which is right here. Move to admit PP.
Defendant's Exhibit PP offered. Any objections?
Mr. McClellan, no, Your Honor.
All right. Without objections, PP is admitted. Defendant's Exhibit PP admitted.
Baldwin, tell the judge what this is.
These are 3 still images from a ceremony video that I...
Mr. McClellan, Judge, I'm going to object to the question. Maybe some foundational questions.
Sure.
I'll ask them. That's Mr. Baldwin. Mr. McClellan says, okay. Mr. Baldwin says, did you One of the things you said that you received earlier was a video of a ritual. Is that correct?
Yes.
And did you watch that video?
Yes.
And what did you then do with the video as it relates to this?
I stilled 3 of the images to be able to discuss.
Okay, so you took still shots of them
Yes.
and then put them on this poster board, or I put them on the poster board, but thought the images would be good to inaudible.
Yes.
All right, move to admit.
We already did.
Already did. So what is the significance about this to you?
This was an Odinist ritual. The part that at the very beginning, they're in an outdoor wooded area near water. They are casting the circle, sanctifying the sacred space, which is how they initiated the ritual. They're using the symbolism. They're talking about Legos, runes, and the water. So it's essentially, a kindred or group of people who are doing an Odinist outdoor ritual, and then they're making offerings to a tree. Different people at the end of the video are bringing different things and placing it at a large tree.
Okay. And for the record, we laid foundation for this on Tuesday. Brad Holder has identified the person touching the tree in this photo as Patrick Westfall. And I would let you know that, Judge. Now, I'm going to put up the same photo, but also a side-by-side that we created, the defense, or maybe you did. Did you create that?
Yes.
Side by side with the tree from the crime scene with LG's blood. And I'm going to move to admit this as QQ, I'm guessing. Move to admit QQ.
Defendant's Exhibit QQ offered. Any objections?
Mr. McClellan, no objection.
All right. Without objections, QQ is admitted. Defendant's Exhibit QQ admitted.
Mr. Baldwin, why did you do this side-by-side presentation of who I said is Patrick Westfall touching the tree in that ceremony in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and this crime scene photo?
Well, to indicate that, again, it was another indicator of the use of a tree as part of the offerings, as part of the ceremonial type of thing that Odinists engage in. And in that video, he was the only one who did that type of offering. Other people just brought like bowls and things.
We're almost to the end of this. Take a look at that. Let me find the one. This would be RR. Was this the packet of stuff you received from us?
Yes.
Move to admit RR.
Defendant's Exhibit RR offered. Any objections?
Mr. McClellan, no objection.
All right. Without objections, RR is admitted. Defendant's Exhibit RR admitted.
Mr. Baldwin, why was this significant to you in terms of trying to access third-party suspects in a ritualistic crime scene setting?
Well, this was a posting, a social media posting of an altar, an Odinist altar, again, indicated by the objects on it, the ritual items. And the person who did the posting was talking about how he had put a rune in his own blood on the tree 2 weeks before, and it was still there. And the date 2 weeks before would have been about 2 weeks after the homicides.
And now, to be clear, the person posting is not Brad Holder. Is that correct?
Correct.
But Brad Holder did like this post.
Correct.
And you circled. What is that you circled there?
The rune that was done in blood. Again, just another indicator that this is the type of ritual that, a blood ritual that was done by an Odinist group that identified themselves as Asatru warriors.
Now, when you've been saying all the way through here that it's personal, whatever each kindred or whatever, each individual person, what's personal to them. So does it mean something when you see this, what you're calling a rune on this tree, and there's what you're saying is a rune in LG's blood on the tree? Is that meaningful?
Well, that he identifies as a rune. I mean, the person identifies that as a rune. And again, it's to demonstrate that this is a practice that was being done among these groups that are seeing each other online.
And lastly, I think we start wrapping up here. Is this going to be an SS? I believe. Take a look at that, and I will represent to the court that S move to admit SS into evidence.
Defendant's Exhibit SS offered. Any objections?
Mr. McClellan, no objection.
All right. I'll show that as admitted without objections. Defendant's Exhibit SS admitted.
Mr. Baldwin, I will submit to the court that this was the defense calls the faked crime scene photo. It was found on Mr. McClellan. Judge, I'm gonna object to him characterizing what the evidence is because the state doesn't agree with the characterization. And I think that the evidence will show today that there's not a foundation for that. And so I object to that. I don't object to the picture being admitted and maybe something that she can consider in her analysis, but not to the characterization by the defense.
Okay. I'll sustain the objection on the characterization.
Mr. Baldwin, I'll submit to the court that this is foundationally was Trooper Purdy has said he saw this image on Brad Holder's Facebook page. So I think that's what we've established. Mr. McClellan says, I don't think that's what his testimony was, Judge. And he's here to testify today, so we can get that from him.
Okay. Mr. McClellan?
Oh, if that's the case.
Okay.
Mr. Baldwin, okay, if this was on Brad Holder's Facebook page or a suspect's Facebook page related to the crime scene, what would this indicate to you?
Well, the depiction of two girls or young women posed with, in a similar manner with, one posed in a similar manner with tree branches on top of them. It's indicative of the crime scene positioning.
And again, is it common for people who may have committed a crime to go online and show kind of indicators of that crime scene on social media?
A lot of in different cases, you're going to have different things. Sometimes you find a diary or a book of spells or whatever they're doing. And in other cases, social media has become the way for people to sort of, to show off, for lack of a better expression, their rituals that and what they've done.
I'm going to finish up here on direct examination with a couple of questions. Based upon your kind of research, once you received this case and you were asked to look into it, do you know whether there are any Odinist groups or were there any Odinist groups in Indiana in 2016, 2017?
Yes. There were groups that splintered. So you had the Soldiers of Odin that I think splintered the Vidlander Social Club, which also had a branch of, Firm 22, which 22 is the alphanumeric code for V. So they're sort of support and women members. And then that might have also splintered into, Guggenor's Path. So there were, and also Soldiers of Odin, there were the Outlaw Hammerskins Nation, the Vinlar Social Club splintered off of them, an extreme violent gang.
And you said earlier that these violent Odin gangs, were they they have white supremacy?
Hold on, I've lost. I went down too far. What page?
41.
We're on page 41.
Thank you.
At the top of the page. These are all.
Okay, yes, thank you. These are all the racist Odinists, the white supremacist racist Odinists.
And did you say earlier that these are splinter Odin groups that believe in blood sacrifice?
Yes, they've done murders. So a ritual murder would be a progression.
Do you know, or are you aware of whether there's any human sacrifice in Odinism?
There are. there's literature that shows different cases of sacrifice every 9 years, and there's different references to it in some writings and in literature of the.
Hang on a second. If the BAU or the prosecution were to claim that what was going on there at the crime scene was called an undoing, would you agree with that assessment?
Oh, is this cross already?
No.
Okay. Okay, so this is still Baldwin.
Yes.
Okay. Now, are you sure?
Yes.
Okay. An undoing is, from the behavioral analysis, is a symbolic reversal of a crime. So it's when a person feels remorse or guilt, and they will either position the body so that they look like they're sleeping, or they will cover the body with a blanket. So they're not doing. They're staging, but they're not doing it as a counter forensic measure. They're doing it out of the remorse they feel. So with the way that these girls are so displayed it with undoing, you're trying to give the person sort of dignity in death. So there's no dignity in the way that these girls were positioned. The only thing that might have some relevance is redressing does occur. Dressing the body is an undoing behavior, and it's usually done by someone who's familiar, knows the person, a family member, or something like that. So in that one aspect, it would possibly be an undoing, but I mean, one is a psychological concept. The other, in my opinion, it's a ritual, and it was done for ritual purposes, not to as to counter forensic measure, and not as a form of remorse.
Okay. And any doubt in your mind this was a ritualistic killing?
None at all.
No other questions.
Mr. McClellan?
Mr. McClellan. Thank you, Judge. Now, sorry.
Cross-examination of Dr. Don Perlmutter. Questions by Mr. McClellan. Are you ready to play Mr. McClellan?
Okay, sorry.
Let me get my stash on.
Okay, put your stash on, slick back the hair, and
Okay.
be dashing.
Ready to go.
So we were in the courtroom, so I'll try to.
Yeah, you just keep being Perlmutter.
I'll try to read it as she was. As she read it. It's hard to read these pauses and all this, but
right. Anyway. I know. Okay.
Miss Perlmutter. Miss Perlmutter, we've talked about your education, and we talked a little bit about where you're employed. Do you work exclusively for the government?
I work with different departments. The university, the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine, is a non-government one.
Do you also do consulting, like you are here today?
Well, yes, case consulting.
And you get paid for those privately as well, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you do consulting or testifying work on the side, beside the job at the university and the government.
Yes.
And so it's part of how you make your living is testifying about these things.
Well, yes.
Okay. What training do you what training do you have specifically to recognize when a crime scene is part of an odinist ritualistic killing?
Well, the training I have is to identify different symbols and rituals that occur. So it's process of elimination, and in that case, that's what I identified it as.
Okay, let me back up. Any of the books that you've written, have they dealt exclusively with odinism?
Well, no.
Okay. Any of the training you've given to any of the kind of government department, have they dealt exclusively with odinism?
Not exclusively, but I have. I mean, they're definitely part of the one day training I do on RMVEs.
Have you had any training specifically on odinistic or odinist ritualistic killings, that narrow field exclusively?
No, I don't know if there's any training on that available.
And so if that's true, which I think it is, that there is no training, how do you educate yourself about a discipline?
Well, it comes from doing research, going to a lot of conferences. I go to gang conferences. I trained. I've done lectures at those conferences. I gonna scroll up. I did have another homicide case though. It's an open investigation, but it clearly has similar type of symbolism.
We'll get to that part.
Okay.
Do you agree that there's a difference between a ritualistic killing and a gang killing?
I mean, they're not always mutually exclusive. Depends on which gang and what they're doing.
Let me ask you this. If I'm a break-off gang of Odinism, say the Hammerskins, and I murder somebody, does that mean the murder scene is an Odinist ritualistic killing?
No.
Okay, so there's a difference, right?
Yes.
If it's a gang killing and I just kill somebody and I'm an Odinist, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a ritualistic killing, correct?
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
Oh, well, and especially since they usually use firearms.
Let's say they don't. Let's say they use a knife. Just because they use a knife doesn't mean it's an Odinistic ritualistic killing, correct?
No.
Okay.
Well, but it's the combination of like.
Okay. We'll get to that. But just because it's done outdoors, does it mean it's a ritualistic killing?
No.
Okay. In these Odinistic ritualistic killings, through your research, who is typically what kind of human is typically sacrificed in these ritualistic killings?
It has meaning to the offender.
Okay.
With the white supremacy groups, they target
minorities, right?
Yes.
Have you ever seen a racist Odinist group target 2 young white females?
They will do that if they can.
It's a yes or no.
No.
Okay. By the name itself, racist would mean some minority group, correct?
Or race traitors?
Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. And so if a racist Odinist group killed a white female child, that would go against the racist part of the group, correct?
But it could be an indicator of other things.
But through your training and experience and what you've seen, you just testified you never in your experience have you seen a racist group kill a white child. That would be against what you learned and what you've seen, correct?
Correct.
Okay. To be a ritual, the name alone, at least to me, implies that it has to be done over and over and over again. In these Odinistic ritualistic killings, have you seen that? Are these killings done over and over and over?
Well, that's not a correct definition of a ritual.
Okay.
Well, that's not how I would define a ritual at all.
Well, let's back up. How many Odinist ritualistic killings have you seen in your career?
There's an open investigation that the other homicide case, and that was in 2020.
And so there's an open investigation on that case?
Yes.
And so I assume with the investigation being open, that whether or not it's an Odinistic ritualistic killing is still open as well?
Yes.
Correct. You talked about various Odinists have general symbols they share, but the rituals are particular to the individual person. Is that correct?
Yes.
Are there any symbols in the ritual that are the same across the board?
They use the hammer. They were pendants. Those are the general type symbols. They get rune tattoos, raven tattoos.
I guess I didn't ask the question very well.
Well, are there any symbols Oh,
No, are there are there any are there any symbols left at ritualistic crime scenes that involve Odinism that are universal across the board?
universal? No.
When, whether it be the state or the defense team, when someone asks you to examine a crime scene, what evidence do you typically look at?
Well, I typically look at any kind of symbolic or forensic evidence. So the scene, the crime scene, autopsy, social media, computers, anything that falls within my area of expertise. Those,
Do you typically, does the party hiring you, do they typically give you all of the evidence and let you sort through it, or do they handpick which evidence you look at?
they give me, I guess, pretty much give you everything, and I review it.
And so when you're reviewing those things, is it important to look at the other people that were investigated?
Yes.
Is it important to look at their background and any evidence that law enforcement or defense may have on that person?
Yeah. Yes.
Would it be important to look at the depositions anyone's given?
That. Well, yes, it could be.
Would it be important to look at the suspect's deposition? Deposition.
Yes.
If you come into a case after somebody's arrest, is it important to you to look at the defendant's statements?
No. Yes, it can be.
Is it important to look at any alibi evidence?
Well, that again might get outside the realm of what my area is.
And so if you're looking at social media posts of a person that was a suspect, it wouldn't be important to you to see if that person had an alibi?
Well, again, that's not my area. I look at the symbolism, the forensics, the language that's used. I've never looked at that type of evidence before.
In this case, you reviewed the things that you looked at the defense had given you, correct?
Yes.
Did you examine anything outside of that?
No.
So you never examined Brad Holder's interviews?
No.
You never examined Brad Holder's Facebook page?
No.
You never examined Brad Holder's deposition?
No.
You never examined any evidence that showed where Brad Holder was that day?
No.
Did you examine any evidence that the state has against the defendant?
No.
Did you examine any other suspect's information?
I looked at a police interview with Patrick Westfall.
So you looked at the evidence. The only evidence you looked at is what the defense spoon-fed you to you or gave to you.
Well, I looked at evidence that was provided to me.
When you looked at the evidence, was it organized in a way that the exhibits are today? Were the side-by-sides given to you in that fashion?
No, I did that.
Well, you didn't do all of them. Some of the side-by-sides that were presented in evidence today were done by the defense as demonstrative exhibits and were given to you like that. Like the side-by-side of the stick or the picture of Brad Holder's hand and the picture of AW's body at the crime scene.
That was given to me, but I had already... that was given to me.
Okay.
Correct.
So the side-by-side the defense created, they were given to you in that fashion.
Well, that one, yes.
Okay. When you're looking at evidence, are there, I don't even know if there's an industry for what you do, but are there industry standards of what things you look at when examining a crime scene?
Well, that's why the methodologies are important. I mean, that's why I have crime scene training. I go to crime scene conferences. There are, the methodology is all those types of that I listed, like place, date, holiday, just all of the causes of death, things like that.
So those are the industry standards. Those place of death, date of death, cause of death, to you, those are the industry standards that someone in your position would look at to determine whether or not this was a ritualistic killing.
Well, they're also the FBI standards. I mean, they have the same victimology. They have categories under that. They may call it different things, but it's the same homicidal manual that I've studied that too. I'm familiar with. They're the same things that everybody looks at, except I go more specific into symbolism.
So, out of the things that you've listed, place of death, date of death, cause of death, murder weapon, what's the most important?
I would say the cause of death. It's the most significant, and the body positioning.
Let's talk about cause of death for a minute. You said that it was important that they were cut, correct? Their throats were cut?
That there were the exsanguination and that word. And yes, the sharp force, correct.
Okay. Does it matter how I mean, I've seen a lot of movies where when they sacrifice, they come from one side of the neck to the other and cut it that way. Is that what you mean when you talk about?
No, it's not that specific. It's the fact that they died from the
Knife wounds.
sharp, yes.
And so the fact that someone died from a knife wound, that's the most important thing you look at when determining whether or not this is a ritualistic killing.
Well, to the neck. I mean,
the knife wound to the neck.
Right.
That doesn't mean every killing where there's a knife wound to the neck is a ritualistic killing.
No.
Right?
Well, absolutely not.
That doesn't mean that. If someone's an odinist and they kill somebody with a knife wound to the neck, that doesn't mean it's a ritualistic killing, correct?
Correct.
It's all very personal to whoever did the killing, correct?
Correct. But it's in combination with all of the other things.
Well, let's go back to that. You said several times it's all personal to whoever did the killing. You're just guessing what these symbols mean because only really the killer knows, right?
Well, I wouldn't say guessing. It's significant somebody did a symbol in blood. It's consistent with other ritual homicide cases.
But it's significant to you. It may not be significant to the killer, and you don't know that, correct?
I guess that's one way of saying it.
Talking about the cause of death, one of the things that you said is that there's signs. There's usually a lot of torture, usually a stabbing. When you looked at the crime scenes here, did you see any evidence of torture?
No, there was no evidence of torture.
Were the victims bound in any way?
No.
Were there any symbols carved in the body?
No.
Do you know what the murder weapon was used to kill the victims?
I do not know if it was a serrated blade. I don't know.
Did you assume from the evidence that you saw from the defense that it was a knife?
I think I'm trying to. I remember reading it might have been referenced in the autopsy report. I'm really not sure.
If a knife.
Well, or maybe no, it was the BAU report. I think mentioned somebody. There was somebody that mentioned a serrated knife somewhere.
If a knife wasn't used, would that change your interpretation of the crime scene?
There was a bullet wound. That would.
What if it was a box cutter?
Well, no, that would not change the interpretation.
So any sharp object in your mind, that's a symbol.
In one case, it was a letter opener.
So yes is the answer?
Yes.
Any sharp object, that's a symbol to you that this is a ritualistic killing.
I mean, if they're using it
combined with everything else you saw.
If they're using it in a situation to,
What's the situation?
Well, in an outdoor scene with a body position and in woods near water, positioning of the bodies, the whole combination.
Positioning of the bodies. Do you agree that AW, her body is right where she died? It was not moved.
I don't know. She was dressed or redressed, so she had to be moved for that to happen. I don't know if she was moved from a distance, but her,
Well, how do you know she was redressed before or after she died?
Well, I don't know if she was redressed before or after, but somebody had put clothes on her because she was wearing undergarments to redress someone. So you're manipulating the body. I don't know if you're a,
But you're assuming she was redressed after she died.
I don't know.
I mean, you have to, right? Because you're saying to redress the body, you would have to reposition it. Well, if she got dressed before she died, there wouldn't be any positioning of the body.
Well, I didn't say she was redressed after she died.
Okay, we'll move on. Do you know for sure that AW's body was moved?
I don't know. I think that her leg was positioned that way.
And what are you basing that on?
I'm basing it on it doesn't appear to be a natural. It just the sticks were placed on her. It just I
No. We're talking about, we're not talking about the sticks, just her body. What gives you the indication that her body was positioned in that way?
well, it's just my opinion. It's that if you're dressing someone, that when you're putting pants on, that your leg is not going to cross over. I think, just the fact that in combination with the other body being positioned.
But for that assumption to be correct, you're assuming that someone dressed her after she died and positioned her body the way while they were dressing her or after they dressed her.
Well, I'm not saying that she was redressed after she died.
And again, how do you know her body was? We're talking in circles here, and I'll go all day if you want.
No.
How do you know her body? How do you know her body was positioned?
Because it's consistent with the rest of the scene.
Okay.
It's consistent with.
How is it consistent with the rest of the scene?
Well, it's consistent with LG being moved and positioned. If you do the aerial view, I mean, both their bodies seem to create they appear to be positioned.
How do you know LG's body was positioned?
Well, her body was moved.
That wasn't my question. How do you know she was positioned? I don't disagree with you that she was moved. How do you know that the killer positioned her body in that specific way she was laying?
Because of the combination of the branches that were put on her. I mean, the way she was displayed.
Let's talk about branches for a minute. The aerial view of the pictures is, did you see any other or any varying angles of that crime scene besides the aerial view that's been admitted into evidence?
Yeah, yes.
And so did you see any pictures of the crime scene from the water?
I don't think I saw it from that angle.
Did you see any crime scene? Did you see the crime scene from the opposite side of the water?
From the other side of the bank?
Yes.
No, I don't think so.
Sorry, Judge. I'm just going through my notes here. There's quite a bit of exhibits. I want to make sure I cover everything. Miss Perlmutter, you talked some of the exhibits of Facebook posts from Brad Holder. Those Facebook posts alone, does that mean that Brad, can you tell that these Facebook posts alone that Brad Holder participates in odinous ritualistic killings?
I can tell that he practices Odinism and believes in magic.
Okay.
And magical thinking.
I appreciate your answers, but it's going to go a lot quicker if you just you answer my questions. From those posts, can you tell that Brad Holder participates in odinist ritualistic killings?
No.
Okay. Can you tell from those posts that Brad Holder participated in this killing?
No.
Can you tell from those posts if Brad Holder does animal sacrifices as part of his odinist belief?
No.
Can you tell he does human sacrifices as part of his odinist belief?
No.
Is there anything in these posts that places him at the scene of the crime?
No.
The symbols that you talk about seeing at the crime scene, and I'm trying to wrap my head around this, but when you go in to a particular and participate and examine a crime scene, do you go into it with the mindset of, okay, I'm specifically looking for what symbols I recognize?
No, not at all. I go in with an open mind to see if it's a symbol at all. It if it's a, or what I go in very open-minded.
Okay. If someone were to give you a picture of a symbol before you looked at a crime scene to say, I'm kind of I'm trying to equate this to looking at cloud formations. If somebody, if I go outside and they say, "Oh, look, I see a train in that cloud," it's hard for me to unsee that. If somebody gives you a picture of a symbol before you look at a crime scene and says, "Hey, I'm looking for this symbol. Do you see it at the crime scene?" Do you think that affects the way you look at a crime scene?
No.
You're able to separate that.
It's actually part of the methodology. It's called bracketing. You have to bracket it out. It's something that you train to do.
And so when someone gives you a side by side photo, that's part of the methodology of examining a crime scene.
Well, as a professional, you look at it individually, and I have thousands of symbols that I compare things to.
When you talked about the things you would look at, you testified it would be, or typically you would look at the suspect's deposition or any statement that the suspect made. Is that correct?
If it's provided to me, I usually am given evidence that's relevant to imagery, symbolism, codes, or any atypical trauma. I don't always get, or occasionally I'll get computers that's connected to like music or social media. I'm not usually given the other standard things you would get with an investigation, like alibis.
Do you agree that it'd be important if these crime scenes are so personalized and individualized? Would would you agree that it'd be important to get as much background information about the suspect as possible?
Well, yes, and sometimes I get writings or diaries or manifests.
In this instance, you got Facebook posts, right?
Well, I get a lot of social media.
Sure.
That I do get.
But you agree it's important to learn as much about the suspect's background as possible before making a determination because these crime scenes are so personalized.
Yes.
And so you come in, and if you came into an investigation after someone was arrested, would it be important to you to have the background of the person arrested?
Yeah. Yes.
Would it be important to you to have any statements that person made?
Yes.
And you didn't get that here.
No.
Was there any indication from you that this crime was sexually motivated?
It did not appear that way.
Why did it not appear that way?
Well, from the autopsy reports, there was no indicators of sexual assault or.
So you're basing that just on that.
Well, and it just usually there would be a sexual assault if they were sexually motivated. There would be.
Does there have to be an indication in the autopsy report for there to be for a crime to be sexually motivated?
I guess not.
Fair to say a crime could be sexually motivated, but before the sexual assault occurs, the crime is committed. Fair?
Could you say that again?
Sure. The crime initially could be sexually motivated, but before any kind of sexual assault occurs, the person kills the victim.
Yes.
If the defendant said that, would that be important information for you to review before you made your analysis?
That analysis starts going into the behavior analysis aspect, the psychological, and I look at that. That is not my area.
You said that the sticks are in no doubt in your mind. The sticks are there for a symbol, as a symbol.
They're the ones on AW, yes.
The ones on AW, but not LG?
LG, they're there because they meant something to the offender, whether they're an alphabet, a sigil, a rune, or they have some meaning to the offender.
And you're confident they weren't for any kind of countermeasure or to cover up the bodies.
Absolutely confident. I mean, how? They're not covering the bodies. They're absolutely not working that way. They're not functioning that way.
But if the crime scene's personalized to the individual, how can you make that assumption that they weren't put there to cover the bodies?
Well, because the bodies aren't covered. So
Not completely covered, right? But there's some coverage.
just minimal that I think is just obviously not done to cover the bodies if they're not covered. I mean, they're
Is
not.
that is that what you're basing your opinion on? That they're not for countermeasures, but they don't completely cover the body?
It yes.
And so therefore they must be symbols.
No, no, not therefore it has to be symbols. It was some kind of it was a ritual act, in my opinion. It was a ritual that was done that had meaning to the offender. There were a lot of ways in that scene that they could have covered the bodies with leaves and things, but that's not what was done. They were arranged in a very specific manner.
If the defendant made a statement that the branches are there intended to cover the bodies, would that change your opinion?
No, I don't think it would.
So regardless of what the defendant said, you're going with those are part of a symbol.
I'm going with they had different meaning to the offender.
Would it change your mind that the defendant here's admitted to killing the girls?
No, it's still
Would it change your mind that he admitted to killing the girls and his defense team has admitted he has no odinous ties? Would that change your mind?
no.
The blood on the tree. How confident are you that is a symbol as opposed to blood spatter?
I'm extremely confident. It's an intentional mark, in my opinion. It's an intentional mark.
You have no training or you have minimal training in blood spatter.
Correct.
So how can you rule on that out?
Well, because of the appearance of it and the context that it's in with it being done at that scene.
What is the context it's in? Can you explain that to me? The context of the blood on the tree is.
I'm going from my experience in a number of cases where markings are put on a tree at these type of scenes in blood, and from my experience, this is consistent with that.
You've had other cases where you've examined crime scenes where this marking has been left in blood at a crime scene.
Not that specific marking.
But you have minimal training in blood spatter.
Correct.
And you've ruled that out.
Yes.
And you've ruled out contact and transfer as well.
Correct.
And we talked a little bit about this, or Mr. Baldwin did. If the BAU examined the evidence in this case and said that the sticks were a form of undoing, your testimony is that they're wrong.
My testimony is that that's their perspective. They're trained to analyze in that way. That's how they're trained.
And so analyzing these crime scenes is all about the perspective you bring into it when you analyze it.
Well, no, it's about a completely different methodology, like looking at it from cultural anthropological methodology as opposed to behavioral analysis.
And you use that methodology when you examine this crime scene?
Correct.
Can I have a moment, Judge?
You may.
Miss Perlmutter, on the chart that Mr. Baldwin put up, there were seven things listed, and he never really touched base on number 7. But number 7 was atypical blood pattern, and underneath it says atypical blood pattern on a victim's face. What did that mean? What did you mean by that?
Well, there appeared to be on LG's face an inconsistent pattern with the blood. There was a reference to it, I think, in the blood spatter report.
Miss Perlmutter, When did you first look at the evidence for this case?
I think about 3 months ago.
So around we're in July. I'm gonna say April 2024.
Yes, I should have.
That's when the evidence was given to you by the defense.
It was. I should have checked the date. Yeah, I think it was around April.
The exact date's not important, but around that time, sometime in April of 2024.
Okay, correct.
And you talked about that some of the evidence you used, maybe not all every time, but that evidence you used to make a determination of whether or not this is I think you used the classic or textbook ritualistic killing. Is that correct?
Yes.
And is it important for you to examine that evidence before you make that findings?
Yes.
How important?
It's very important. It's important to examine the evidence.
Well, I mean, common sense says it's important to examine that stuff before making an analysis, so your analysis is correct.
Yes.
Is that fair?
Yes.
Back on September 19th of 2023, did you appear on Court TV?
Yes.
And you gave an analysis of this killing at that time. Is that correct?
Yes.
And prior to giving that analysis, had you observed any evidence from this case?
I just read A. Frank's memo.
Did you observe any of the evidence from this case?
No.
And on that television show, I hope I get this quote right, but you told them that this is a classic ritual murder, correct?
Correct.
And you told them that, before examining the evidence the defense had given you.
Correct.
And now you're in the business of consulting and testifying. In these types of cases, you testified to that you get paid to do these things, right?
Yes.
And so, if you were there on Court TV, a national program, and say, this is a classic ritualistic murder, and then you change your story, that may hurt your business, right?
That's not what happened. I reviewed the report, which was very specific, and I gave my opinion. And looking at the evidence, if it was different, I would have changed my opinion.
I wouldn't have. I'm back. Are we sure this isn't a hint to leave the viewers hanging for
We're on
this?
page. No, we're on page 63. I'm getting ready to read line 23.
Yeah.
Is it your practice that when you're examining crime scenes to look at the motions filed by the defense to make an analysis of a crime scene?
That was given to me by Court TV people.
I understand that. Are there any other cases where you've examined a crime scene where you've looked at a motion from the defense to make an analysis of whether or not that crime scene is a ritual killing?
That was no, that was
goes outside your standards, correct?
yes.
Okay. I don't have any other questions, Judge.
Mr. Baldwin, redirect examination of Dr. Don Perlmutter. Questions by Mr. Baldwin.
Mr. Baldwin, you said something about a serrated edge, and that was you believe in the autopsy report?
It was either in the autopsy or the BAU report, and it was mentioned, I think, in one of the reports.
If it was in the autopsy report, it's in evidence. Do you know if a box cutter has a serrated edge typically? If you don't know, that's fine.
I don't think they do.
Okay, you were talking and trying to answer. You said something about race trading, a race trader. What were you trying to say there? I think the question was, has anybody ever seen racists who kill white people?
White supremacists target minorities, Jewish people, and anybody they consider a race traitor. They also get into like gang with each other. I mean, they will target members of their group that they feel didn't do certain things correctly, or was an informant, or there's a lot of other reasons they will target.
All right. Just for everybody's understanding, that's when you are an odinist group with racist kind of ties to racism, which is more prevalent in terms of if and I don't know if you know the answer to this, which is the more driving force, the odinism or the racism.
They just go hand in hand. It's part of it's fundamental to the racist odinism, because they feel that Christianity mongrelized the pure Aryan traditions, so they identify with what they think is the original warrior culture.
When you were asked by the state about this defendant here, not having the defense as represented, there's zero evidence that Richard Allen has any ties whatsoever to Odinism, runes, Norse paganism, any type of cult. Would that be consistent with that crime scene? That somebody that committed those crimes, somebody who has no knowledge of that.
Well, that would be consistent.
No other questions.
Mr. Baldwin, or I'm sorry, Mr. McClellan.
Mr. McClellan, thanks, Judge.
Questions by Mr. McClellan.
Miss Perlmutter, you talked about race traitor. Did either one of those victims fall within, to your knowledge, did either one of the victims fall within one of those categories you talked about under being a race traitor?
I don't have knowledge of that.
So no, to your knowledge, neither of them fell under one of those categories, either minority, Jewish, I think you named something else.
Informants and the others, no, they don't.
Okay.
No.
You said driving force. Mr. Baldwin asked you, what is the driving force, Odinism or racism? And you said they go hand in hand. Does that mean they're equal?
Well, they see it as their religion. It's their belief system. So I guess you can't separate the two.
Racism is so ingrained in Odinism that's what you mean when you say they go hand in.
I mean, it's intrinsic, yes.
I think you said hand in hand.
To it, yeah.
Okay. Intrinsic, okay.
Intrinsic to it.
And so, to your knowledge, were either of those girls part of a minority that they would be racist against?
Not that I know of.
Okay. Would it be unusual for a racist Odinist to kill somebody that they don't classify as a minority or part of a race traitor?
Well, again, they splintered from violent gangs, so there can just be reasons because they didn't participate in some organized crimes or whatever criminal activity they're involved in. They could be related to someone that they're, retaliating against. It can be that way too. It can be the motivation could be the combination of those things.
In this offense, did you have any information that played into your analysis that was the case in this crime?
I didn't have it.
That the person that the killer was trying to get back at the victims for some reason, is there any information that you had that factored into your analysis?
I didn't have a lot of information on the victims.
Okay.
The victimology.
Would that be something important that you'd like to have in order to make your assessment? Or are you comfortable with making your assessment based on what you got?
I'm comfortable with making my assessment.
Just a moment, Judge.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have anything else, Judge. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Doctor. You may step down.
Thank you.
And that concludes the testimony of Dr. Perlmutter given at hearing on motion in limina conducted August 1st, 2024. Thank you, everyone, for sticking with us. This has been a long testimony here, 67 pages long. And I want to thank you, Aspen and Laura, for doing a great job. That was a tongue twister at some
Thank
point,
you.
wasn't it?
I know. And sorry for the few little slip ups or mess ups, but
Well, we
thank you
did
so
the
much
best
for
we could based on what both of us saw. So
Yeah.
yeah.
we're gonna act.
Absolutely. I think you did a good job of switching characters there, and I appreciate all your help. And we'll see you next time on Deb's True
Right.
Crime Notebook.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, everyone.